it's a sin.
And a very warm welcome back. Yes, it's me, Keza here. Yes, I've been diagnosed now for nearly 11 years, and one person I've been waiting to do an interview is actually on the phone now. We've got the lovely Matthew Hodson here. Hello, Matthew.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's like 2 generations here now. It's been literally, how long? 11 years now since I've been waiting to do this interview with you. So, we've had the Sin TV programme. Everybody's going mental with it, aren't they? So, we've got some kind of background. We the listeners need to know a bit more background of you, Matthew. How many years you've been positive now?
I've been living with diagnosed HIV for almost 23 years now. So that means I was diagnosed in 1998, which was just a couple of years after the arrival of effective combination treatment.
Whoa. So you'll have seen a big... What was the first treatment like, Matthew? Because I've asked a lot of your generation, what was the first treatment like?
Well, I mean, the first treatments were quite hard to take, and there was a lot of side effects, partly because we kind of didn't have the right dosing protocols at that point. Now, I wasn't on treatment straight away because back then you didn't go on treatment until your CD4 count had dropped quite low. Initially, it was like you wouldn't go on treatment unless your CD4 count was below 200, and then they raised that to 350 and then to 500, and then now they say start treatment as soon as possible. But back then, because treatment was kind of considered quite toxic, they wanted to delay you starting treatment for as long as possible because they kind of were concerned that people were going to get ill as a result of the treatment. So I didn't start treatment until I think about 2003 or something like that, when my CD4 count started to drop, and it was like, okay, you actually need to start treatment now because otherwise you're going to get ill. And I was very lucky because, by then dosing had got better, so I've never really had any severe side effects.
Yeah, because a few people have had side effects before then, because I looked it up, it was quite bad, one of the side effects.
Yeah, I mean, they were terrible, and it is really interesting because if you look at AIDS-related deaths, particularly if you look in kind of the UK or kind of other countries which have good access to treatment, and it gets to 1996, which is when at the Vancouver conference they said we can now treat HIV effectively. It's no longer a death sentence, and that was obviously such an incredible moment in the history of medicine as well as in the history of HIV. And if you look at the data on deaths, they just plummet because they've been steadily increasing and increasing, and they just drop just like that, which is wonderful because suddenly we could treat HIV. But actually, even in those years, I mean, even since the year 2000, I mean, I can think of at least 3 friends I know who've died as a result of complications which were caused by HIV. And they were all people who had been living with HIV for a long time and whose bodies had taken quite a beating from the virus and also from some of the early attempts at treatment. So, I mean, I think it's just so great now, because if you're diagnosed now with HIV and you're at a relatively early stage of infection, you should have not, well, I mean, we say now that you should have the same life expectancy, but actually sometimes people with HIV are living longer than people who do not have HIV because they're more likely to get medical attention. So they've got a doctor who they see on a regular basis and who they can talk to about their health. So other health conditions get picked up for us. So in some respects, we might be living longer. It's
great,
amazing.
Isn't it?
It's amazing progress, isn't it?
It is the progress we've had. I mean, compared to when I was in 2010, I was on 1, 2, 3, 4, about 11 tablets a day,
Really?
and gone down to 1 tablet a day and Truvada. And I think it's amazing how it's changed, Matthew, hasn't it? Compared to what it was. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, and I think, for lots of people watching It's a Sin, and obviously that's I think it starts in 1981, I think, or something like that, and it goes up to pretty much the end of that decade. But the whole period it covers is the period when there was no effective treatment, and if you were diagnosed with HIV back then, it was pretty much a death sentence. And I think for me, who was diagnosed 2 years after treatment came in, I just recognise how incredibly lucky I am, not only that I had something that was available which saved my life, but I mean that mental stress of being told, we can't cure you, we can't treat you. We still can't cure it now, but at least we can treat it effectively, and that's obviously so important.
It's so important now that it's changed so much. I find it like when I'm dealing with clients and dealing with people now, being trained to be a life coach. That's one reason why I'm bringing you on. It's unbelievable how the treatment has changed and how people. I'm glad they brought this in program out. I was saying to you the other day, brilliant, because it's shown the history of it as well, and it's. I mean, we've heard them. I've been in London with you. When I was in 2010, I was in London. And I met all what you call the old scene of the HIV side of the guys and the females as well. And taken their stories as well. And I've also taken ones in America, Matthew. And I think meeting when Donald Trump was on and we didn't get the tablets. I mean, I was interviewing a guy and it was the horrendous experience that he couldn't get the drugs. So we're so lucky in this country, aren't we, Matthew?
Yeah, and I think this is really important, is that we recognise how lucky we are, but we also have to recognise that there are millions of people around the world who have been diagnosed and still do not have access to treatment. So for me, that's one of the things which I'm really kind of concerned about. And it's not just, I mean, it is in some sub-Saharan African nations where there is real challenges, but it's not just in sub-Saharan Africa or countries like that, which are kind of fairly resource poor, but it's also in the United States. I was talking to a colleague of mine there the other day, and he said how he had not been able to get hold of his treatment last year, and he's been living with diagnosed HIV for some time. He's actually a journalist, and he was like, if me as a journalist who lives in New York has been told, sorry, we can't get you your drugs, your life-saving drugs. It's like, that's how bad it is. That's how bad it is. And if you look in Russia, people who are diagnosed there don't have access to treatment often.
We've still got European countries as well.
We need to continue to keep pressure on and apply pressure and make sure that everyone who's got diagnosed HIV has access to the treatment, which saves lives.
It does, because, I mean, we've even got European countries still not getting the right HIV treatment. Is still on the old regime. It's unbelievable, Matthew. There's still things going on.
Well, that's why we've got to keep plugging away, keep making sure that people are informed. But it's also, some of it's about this kind of very big issues, relating to funding. And one of the things which I'm very concerned about, of course, is to ensure that the UK plays its part in rolling out international aid so that no one should be deprived of HIV treatment. That's
brilliant. That's why I was on about the other week on with you as well, because that's one thing we are looking at. And another thing we are looking at, and I'm looking at as coaching as well as Matthew, stigma. Stigma is getting kind of still, being a HIV male myself, I still get a lot of stigma, and some of my female side of HIV is still having stigma. And it's hard to approach into Matthew with the stigma.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? When you think, well, why is there still stigma related to HIV? I think some of that is about kind of outdated information. I mean, you and I have spoken in the past about U equals U, and I think U equals U is the most incredible bit of information. I want everyone to know about it. So for people who don't know what it is, it stands for undetectable, means untransmittable. And this is the knowledge that we now have, that if you are on effective HIV treatment and the virus is suppressed in your body to undetectable levels, then there is absolutely no risk of passing HIV on to your sexual partners. That's irrespective of whether you use condoms or anything else. You cannot pass it on during sex. And I think so much of the stigma that people living with HIV experience is still related to that fear of, what if he gives it to me? What if she gives it to me? And you've got to challenge that, because actually that's really out-of-date information now.
It is. I know I picked up on it a few years back. I mean, I had really, really bad stigma. That's why I ended up in London. And when I came out HIV positive to the UK, But the stigma is there, but we've got to go and listen to positive people and people who are non-positive. We've got to realise that, yes, you're undetectable. Once you're on the meds and you've worked on it, you are undetectable. And people will understand the UU campaign, because we and Matthew and the other team and all the coaches as well are pushing the UU campaign more than anything. I think that's the one thing we need to do, and bring it to education.
Well, I think there needs to be more than just that, though. I mean, I think that does strike at the heart of a lot of the kind of fear that people have of people living with HIV. But I think that stigma is born out of fear and ignorance.
Yeah,
and so it's one of the things which I try and do, and I know that you do this as well, is by being very visible about living with HIV, being very open, shameless about it, brazen even, then I hope that it will help to break down some of those kind of barriers, some of those kind of concerns. I think it's very much like how it was for LGBT people in, say, the 1980s, the early 1980s, when it was, I mean, obviously I remember that time. I was around and I was gay back then. And, like so many gay people, it was very, very rare that you would talk to your employers. Very rare that you would be out to your family about being LGBT. And that really helped fuel homophobia, because people didn't realise that they actually knew anyone who was LGBT. And then when people said, well, actually, I'm not going to hide it, I'm going to come out the closet, I'm going to be very open about being a lesbian or a gay man or a trans person or a bisexual person, that people suddenly realised, well, hold on, my brother is gay, or the woman who cuts my hair is a lesbian, or it's when you know people, when they're in your family, when they're in your workplace, when they're in your church, that suddenly all of that fear and ignorance gets dispelled. And I think it's exactly the same with HIV now. I think we're at that point where it's really important that if I feel like I'm very lucky because I don't kind of fear rejection or any of those things. I'm kind of I'm financially stable, and so I appreciate. I do have lots of benefits which make it easier for me. But I really want to use any platform that I have to say there's nothing to be frightened about HIV. Come to me, talk to me. I can answer your questions, because when those questions are answered, then we're not scary. We're just the same as anybody else.
That's why there's a couple of years back in Matthew as well on the radio, on Gaydar Radio, all them years ago, I said, everybody who's HIV positive has a story. And I stopped on Comp Street that year for World AIDS Day, and that's how the impact, even from 2010 to now, it is. I agree with you there, Matthew, totally. It's going to be education. What we're doing there is getting out there and telling people we are human, just the same as everybody else. That's what I always used to say, we are human as everybody else. When I've done some BBC interviews a long time ago, when I've been fuming and went in there in World AIDS Day, but it's educating people is the most important. Now, one I'm going to ask you, Matthew, what I absolutely loved, what you did with Mad Trust, one of my charities, is the green grass. It's the grass is always grinder. Now that, amazing, Matthew. I've got to admit, I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
It's because being my Mad Trust member of one of the charities in the performing arts industry, and Matthew's also is, and that brought the HIV side and the chem side. And it brought the undetectable. It brought everything together, and I loved that one. And I've actually used it as a training material, and I'm going to actually put it on a few material this moment. And I really think it's brilliant, Matthew, that.
Oh, that's really kind. So I guess perhaps people aren't aware of what the Grassroots Grinder is, but it's a TV series which I actually acted in. Although I do play someone who works, I play a healthcare provider who works at 5016th Street, and it's about kind of some of the people who my character encounters. I say it like that, like I'm the central character. I'm not the central character. The central character is played by a friend of mine called Denham Spur, who's a very talented actor.
He is very talented.
And it's about him and his boyfriend, who's played by Sadiq Falarin, who's also a very talented actor. Everyone in it's very talented. And it's about them kind of, negotiating sex and love and, dealing with chemsex and the impact that has had on London's LGBT communities. It's a 7-part drama now. If you watch it on Amazon Prime, which is, I have to admit, is where I would recommend watching it, because